Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we continue with a series of lessons on Macbeth. We are going to start today with Act 5 and specifically going to look at Scene 1 and Scene 2. So please have your Macbeth books and notes with you that you can follow and add notes as I am explaining. It's a beautiful day to learn something new, so here we go. Right, first of all, the summary, Act 5, Scene 1. The setting is Macbeth's castle. Lady Macbeth's gentlewoman tells a doctor that her mistress sleepwalks, but refuses to repeat what she heard her say. The Elizabethans believed that sleepwalking and disturbed dreams were the work of evil spirits. Lady Macbeth enters, sleepwalking, tormented by both her sins and those committed by Macbeth. Filled with guilt and fear, she desperately tries to wash imaginary blood from her hands. She relives Duncan's murder and acknowledges her awareness of the murders of Banquo and Lady Macduff and her children. The doctor says he cannot cure her. This is a sickness of the mind, not the body. So she needs to confess her sins to a priest. He advises the lady in waiting to keep a constant eye on Lady Macbeth and to remove everything from her she can use to harm herself. Noting her depression, he foresees a suicide attempt. Now, as you see, we are back in Scotland. Remember, Act 4 ended in England, where Malcolm, Macduff, and the English army left for Scotland to overthrow Macbeth and take back Scotland. Right, so we're in Dunsinane, a room in the castle. Now, in this scene, we see that Macbeth and his wife are now living in the castle at Dunsinane. This scene dramatizes the consequences of evil actions. Lady Macbeth is overcome by guilt. She's been driven to insanity and fears life after death. In her case, it would be hell. And the most tragic part to note is that Lady Macbeth, who had sinned so deeply for her husband's sake, drifts away from him and dies in lonely isolation later in the play. So now there's a doctor of physic and a waiting gentlewoman. So it's a medical doctor and a lady in waiting observe Lady Macbeth walking in her sleep. Note that this scene is written in prose. Shakespeare's less important characters speak in prose. It removes from Lady Macbeth the splendor of being a queen or a royal. Lady Macbeth has bottled up all her guilty secrets, and she has also deliberately repressed her own tender femininity. The intense emotional disturbance she has been through exhausted her, and the guilty feelings she has tried to suppress now come out while she sleeps. Her speech is broken, disjointed, and agitated. She is muddling all the experiences she has been through. Her life is now a living hell. She now realizes that she is eternally damned and that hell is a frightening, dark place. Right, so the doctor says, I have 2 nights watched with you, but can perceive no truth in your report. When was it she last walked? So the gentlewoman told the doctor about Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking and other actions she performs while sleepwalking. And they have watched her for 2 nights and the doctor has not found any proof of this. And then the gentlewoman answers, since her His Majesty went into the field. Now Macbeth at this time is in the field trying to suppress the revolt of the Scottish nobles who rebelled against him. And then the gentlewoman goes on. I've seen her rise from her bed, throw her nightgown upon her, unlock her closet, take forth paper, fold it, write upon it, read it afterwards, seal it, and again return to bed. Yet all this while in a most fast sleep. So take forth paper, fold it, write upon it, read it afterwards. It might be a reference to the letter Macbeth sent her. So that's a visual reminder of her reading the fateful letter in Act 1, Scene 5. Or it can be a note she wrote to him, or her efforts to ease her conscience by writing down her secrets in a kind of a diary. And then the doctor says it is unnatural to be asleep and then perform the actions of a person that is awake. So the doctor wants to know if Lady Macbeth has ever said anything during this unnatural, disturbed state. And then the gentlewoman answers, that, sir, which I would not report after her. So she confirms that Lady Macbeth has indeed spoken while sleepwalking, but she refuses to reveal what Lady Macbeth has said. And the doctor says, but you made to me, and it is most meet you should. So he says, you should confide in me as it is the right thing to do. The word meet refers to it being fitting or appropriate. And the gentlewoman answers, neither to you nor anyone, having no witness to confirm my speech. So she refuses, as she has no witness to confirm that she's telling the truth. So she's afraid she might be accused of lying about Lady Macbeth to place her in a bad light. At that moment, Lady Macbeth enters with a candle. And then she says, here she comes. This is her very guise, and upon my life, fast asleep. Observe her, stand close. Now we see here the tragic ruin of Lady Macbeth. The doctor and the gentlewoman now watch as she goes through the actions she has done for months, writing letters, sleepwalking. She has not had any sleep or rest. And now when Lady Macbeth enters at this moment, it is one of the great dramatic moments of the play. The audience feels great pity for this woman because they realize she's not totally evil. She's a reminder of what may happen if the darker side of human nature is encouraged to neglect of all good qualities. Right, and then the doctor asked, where did she get the candle? And the gentlewoman answered, why, it stood by her. She has light by her continually. It is her command. Now notice Lady Macbeth's fear of darkness. She had previously summoned darkness. Now she's so afraid of the darkness that she insisted on having a lit candle by her bedside at all times. Darkness symbolizes damnation for her. Right, and the doctor goes on, he says, you see her eye are open. Now at this stage of the drama, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth react differently to their guilt. Discuss. So again, if you have to discuss two different characters, be very sure to do it separately so that the marker can immediately see what is applicable to which character. Look at the mark allocation that will determine the length of your discussion with each character. Now, at this stage of the drama, so everything that happened up to now, it's about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and their reaction to their guilt. So you can say Lady Macbeth, she falls into depression. She starts walking in her sleep. She reveals strange behavior. And then Macbeth went out to kill more people. Unlike Lady Macbeth, he has the physical strength and determination to remain king. And then here's a quote from the previous slide about the candle. When the doctor inquired, where did she get the light? And the gentlewoman said, why, it stood by her. She has light by her continually. Discuss the irony. Lady Macbeth is carrying a burning candle while she's sleepwalking, but the candlelight is of no use, seeing that she is still sleeping, although her eyes are open, right, these two questions from previous papers. Another question, what do we know about the character of the gentlewoman? Remember, a character trait is not an action. Again, you have to look at the mark allocation. If it's for 2 marks, you usually have to give a character trait and then a motivation. Right, if it's only 1 mark, it's usually just 1 character trait. But what do we know about the character trait of the gentlewoman? The character trait, she's observant, attentive, vigilant, alert, and the motivation, because she describes the behavior of Lady Macbeth in detail to the doctor, or she's trustworthy, honorable, as she does not, the motivation, want to disclose Lady Macbeth's utterances. And another one, she's reliable, dependable, and the motivation, as she makes sure that Lady Macbeth's orders are followed, a light next to the bed. Another question, what is Lady Macbeth's state of mind at this point in the play? So it's 1 character, just Lady Macbeth, her state of mind, and the key words at this point in the play. She is tormented or haunted by memories of her role in Duncan's murder, and her disorientated or confused or disturbed state of mind manifests in hallucinating, sleepwalking, and sleep talking. Again, take very careful note of the mark allocation in each of these questions if similar questions will be asked. Right, we continue here. And the gentlewoman says, although her eyes are open, she cannot see what is happening around her as she is fast asleep. And then the doctor asks, what is it she does now? Look how she rubs her hands. And the gentlewoman answers, it is an accustomed action. It's what she usually does with her to seem thus washing her hands. So she rubs her hands together as if washing them. She's clearly haunted by Duncan's blood on her hands, and she tries in vain to rid herself of the feeling of guilt. So she constantly rubs her hands as if to wash away the blood, and that is an outward sign of the sin of murder. Right, and then she goes on, she says, I have known her to continue in this a quarter of an hour. And Lady Macbeth speaks for the first time. Yet here's a spot. And the doctor says, she speaks, I will set down what comes from her to satisfy my remembrance the more strongly. So he decides to write down what Lady Macbeth says so that he will not forget anything. And then she goes on, out, damned spot, out, I say. So that's a hateful remark. She frantically wishes the blood stains on her hands could disappear. But it shows us she cannot escape the consequences of what she has done. It's also an example of heavy irony, because she told Macbeth that a little water clears us of this deed in Act 2, Scene 2. Now Macbeth knew then this was not true, and she would never remove the spot she sees, which indicates her implication in Duncan's death, and this is a metaphor for her guilt. Now these words arouse the doctor's suspicion, and the words that she's going to speak now, in other words, the words that follow, suggest to him not only that she is suffering, but also the reasons for that suffering. So now she goes on, she says, 1, 2, why? Then it is time to do it. So she remembers the striking of the clock, which was the signal she and Macbeth had agreed upon for the murder of Duncan. And then she says, hell is murky. So hell is described as dark and gloomy. The idea of hell is now a horrifying reality for her. She's terribly afraid of the punishment she expects for her evil deeds. And then she goes on, fie, my lord, fie, a soldier and a feared. So she remembers that Macbeth was unwilling to commit the murder, and she had driven him to it by calling him a coward. And then she goes on, what need we fear? Who knows it? When none can call our power to account. So she told him nobody would be able to accuse them of the murder. So it confirms their involvement in Duncan's murder. And then she goes on, yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him? So she's talking about Duncan. She did not expect Duncan to bleed so much because she dipped her hands in his blood to smear the guards. And then the doctor says, did you hear that? Do you mark that? And then she goes on, the Thane of Fife had a wife. Where is she now? So this is a reference to the murder of Macduff's family. She knows her husband is responsible for it. What will these hands never be clean? So the blood she cannot remove stands for the guilt she cannot erase. So remember the irony earlier when she told Macbeth that it will only take a little water to wash off the blood, and with that their guilt. So the opposite happened. And then she goes on, no more of that, my lord, no more of that. You mar all with this starting. Now she is reliving the banquet when Banquo's ghost appeared and Macbeth exposed his fear and guilt. And then the doctor says, go to, you have known what you should not. So be quiet, you know more than you should have been revealed. He's talking to the gentlewoman. And then she answers, she has spoke what she should not. I'm sure of that. Heaven knows what she has known. So the lady in waiting says that Lady Macbeth has spoken of things that she should not have mentioned, and she still sympathizes with the horrors Lady Macbeth must have experienced. Here's the smell of blood still, again Lady Macbeth speaking. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Now note the irony as well. In Act 2, Scene 2, she said, a little water clears us of the deed. Now this is also hyperbole, like the same as Macbeth used in Act 2 when he said, all the water in great Neptune's ocean will not wash the blood from his hands. So, uttering a heavy sigh, Lady Macbeth complains that she can still smell the blood on her hands and that all the perfumes in Arabia will not be able to remove the smell. As I said, it's an example of hyperbole, which is over-exaggeration to make a certain point. So the point that she's making here is that she will never be able to get rid of the guilt. And then the doctor just goes on, what a sigh is there, the heart is sorely charged. She's overburdened with guilt. And the gentlewoman answered, I would not like to have such a guilty conscience, not even for the honor of being queen. And then the doctor says, well. And she misunderstands the doctor and she thinks he means, all right, everything will be fine. And she expresses the hope that all may still work out well for Lady Macbeth, but that is not what he meant. He says, this disease is beyond my practice yet, so it's outside of his ability, a field of his medical skills. He cannot cure her. Yet I have known those which have walked in their sleep, who have died holily in their beds. So I have heard of people who were sleepwalking, but they died naturally and peacefully in their beds. So not all sleepwalking results from a guilty conscience. And then Lady Macbeth goes on again. Wash your hands, put on your nightgown, look not so pale. I tell you yet again, Banquo is buried. He cannot come out on his grave. So here she interlinks the first two murders. She first refers to the time immediately after Duncan's murder, where she told Macbeth, wash your hands, put on your nightgown, look not so pale. And then she jumps to the banquet when Macbeth said he saw Banquo's ghost, where she told him, I tell you yet again, Banquo is buried. He cannot come out of his grave. Right, and then the doctor said, even so. So it's an exclamation of surprise at the revelation of the second crime. The doctor now understands the situation. The rumors that Macbeth is responsible for Banquo's murder too is now confirmed. And then she says, to bed, there's knocking at the gate. So she remembers the night of Duncan's murder, when Macbeth appeared to be incapable of recovering from the shock of having murdered the king. And she basically had to drag him off to bed. And then there's knocking at the gate. So that was the knocking of Macduff that wanted to come in. And she says, come, give me your hand. What's done cannot be undone. To bed. Right, so what's done cannot be undone. Look at the irony. After Duncan's murder, she said, what is done, meaning he must forget about it and put it behind him. She did not realize that the consequences and guilt would remain. It cannot be undone. So she wishes that she could undo what she has done. She is plagued with remorse. Right, so we see here that Lady Macbeth's speech has become fragmented and broken by an enormous emotional pressure. The previously cool, domineering wife has been reduced to a gibbering person whose speech is illogical and ranges back and forth in a crazed fashion, and it almost signifies nothing. Right, and then the doctor asks, will she go to bed? And the gentlewoman says, directly. Now the doctor's talking, he says, well, the rumors of rebellion are being spread. And when a king commits unnatural deeds, such as murder, rebellion is a natural result. And he goes on, he says, infected minds to their deaf pillows will discharge their secrets. So troubled and guilty minds will disclose their secrets by talking in their sleep. And then more needs she, the divine, than the physician. Lady Macbeth needs a priest to whom she can confess her sins rather than a doctor. And then he goes on, look after her. Remove from her the means of annoyance and still keep eyes upon her. So she should constantly watch Lady Macbeth and remove anything she can use to hurt herself. It seems as if the doctor is worried that she might commit suicide. And then he goes on, he says, my mind has made and amazed my sight, I think, but dare not speak. So he feels bewildered and confused. He cannot believe what he has heard and seen. However, he cannot talk to anyone about what he knows. In this dangerous political climate, it will lead to his death. Right, Act 5, Scene 2. The Scottish thanes who have deserted Macbeth are marching to join up with Malcolm and the English army. Katniss says that Macbeth has fortified Dunsinane and that he has been deserted by many of his followers. Macbeth has to depend on hired soldiers to fight for him. Note that the meeting between the two armies will take place at Birnam Wood. Now, the appearance of the soldiers indicates a change in the mood of the play. They are going to restore order in Scotland. Meanwhile, Macbeth has fortified Dunsinane as he has been deserted by many of his followers. He chose to await the attack at this specific castle, encouraged by the strength of his castle to withstand a siege, as well as the witch's prediction regarding Birnam Wood. So we're at the country near Dunsinane. There's drum and colours, it's flags, and then the soldiers and Menteith, Caithness, Angus and Lennox enter. Now they are all supporters of Malcolm, and they are also all the Thanes who have deserted Macbeth. Each of them are marching with their soldiers to meet their English allies at Birnam Wood. We can assume that the soldiers of Macduff and Ross will be among them too, even though the two of them are with the approaching English army. Now Menteith says the English power is near, led on by Malcolm, his uncle Seward, and the good Macduff. Revenges burn in them, for their dear causes would to the bleeding, and the grim alarm excite the mortified man. He says the desire for revenge burns in them, and they gave such sound reasons for revenge that it would even rouse a dead man to take up arms and fighting in this war. Now the reasons for revenge, obviously Macbeth killed his father, Duncan, and Macbeth killed his whole family. Right. So, and then near Birnam Wood. So the two armies plan to meet at Birnam Wood. It reminds us of the third prophecy of the witches. Macbeth will not be defeated until Birnam Wood marched against him at Dunsinane. All right. So with the mention of Birnam Wood and Dunsinane, the audience can see Macbeth's fate is approaching. And then Caithness asks, who knows if Donalbain be with his brother? And Lennox says, no, I have a list of all the noblemen. According to that list, Donalbain is definitely not part of the attack. He says there is Seward's son and many unruffed youths that even now protest their first of manhood. So they are beardless, young, inexperienced men who for the first time declare they are grown men and capable of fighting by joining in this battle. And then Menteith just asked, what does the tyrant? So where is Macbeth? So he answered, great Dunsinane is strongly fortified. So he chose to await the English attack at the strongly fortified Dunsinane. And then he says, some say he is mad. Others that lesser hate him do call it valiant fury. So some people regard Macbeth as mad. Others who are more sympathetic to him say he's showing the anger of a brave man. And then he says, but for certain, it is certain, however, that he cannot control his corrupt kingdom anymore. And then he uses here, he cannot buckle his distempered course within the belt of rule. So he cannot, Macbeth now, cannot control his undisciplined followers. Again, a clothing image with the belt. It's an image of a fat man who cannot buckle his belt. And it emphasizes that Macbeth does not fit into his borrowed robes, because he's not the rightful king. Neither can he control his followers. And then he goes on, Angus says, now does he feel his secret murders sticking on his hands. So it's guilt that he cannot erase. So he's talking about he can no longer attribute his murders to others as he did that of Duncan, where he said the two sons did it, and of Banquo, where he said that Fleance did it. So it is blood on Macbeth's hands. And then he goes on, he says, every minute of the day, the soldiers who are deserting him are a reminder of his own treason. And he goes on, those he commands move only in command, nothing in love. Those that Macbeth commands act only because he orders them, and they are afraid of him, not because they are loyal or have respect for him. He has forfeited loyalty through the secret murders he has committed. And then the last part, he says, now does he feel his title hang loose about him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. Again, the clothing image. The title of king is too big for Macbeth, like a robe of a giant on a dwarf. It draws the attention to Macbeth's illegitimate kingship. Right, and then Menteith goes on and he says, who can blame his troubled nerves for jumping and starting when he has all those murderous, wicked deeds on his conscience, when his mind and soul is filled with self-condemnation. So every aspect of Macbeth's nature is in rebellion with itself. Means everything that is inside him hates itself for being there. Right, and then Katharine says, well, we march on to give obedience where it is truly owed. So they should offer their loyal support to the person it really belongs to, and that is Malcolm, the legitimate king of Scotland. And then he says, meet we the medicine of the sickly wheel. So the state of Scotland is seen as suffering from a sickness, and Malcolm is the medicine to cure it. And with him pour we in our country's purge each drop of us. So Malcolm symbolizes the remedy or cure for Scotland's illness, and they will gladly sacrifice every drop of their blood or lives to cleanse and heal their country. And this purge refers to the practice of bloodletting to cure a disease. They will gladly forfeit their lives to free their country from evil. Thus, they will restore health to Scotland, that was diseased by Macbeth's tyranny. Lennox just says, also much as it needs to dew the sovereign flower and drown the weeds, make we our march towards Burnham. So Macbeth is the weed and the flower is Malcolm. Malcolm should be king and be watered so that he can grow, while the weed should be drowned and thus be destroyed. Lennox says that they may have to spill enough blood to promote Malcolm to the throne and kill Macbeth. Right, that's the end of Act 5, Scene 2, and the end of today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Tomorrow we will continue with Act 5, Scene 3. Have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe. Make wise choices. Goodbye.